Good morning, mathematicians, and happy Monday. Today we are finding the area using different size square units. So this is Unit 10, Lesson 3. Make sure that you're on the right page. So for our problem today, I actually wanted to go back to 1. This is a challenge problem, so some of you might have already done this. But I wanted to look at this because I wanted you to notice that area doesn't always have to be a perfect square. It doesn't always have to be a perfect rectangle. You can find the area of any shape. Okay, so even shapes that are a little bit more complex. So if you take a look at this trapezoid here, you can tell that some of our square units aren't whole square units. So what can we do? Well, the first thing that we can do is figure out, well, how many whole square units are there? So I'm going to look and I'm going to shade in with my pencil what I see that's a whole square unit. So I can see that there's 1 here, and I'm going to write a 1. There's 1 here, 2, I have 3, I have 4, 5, 6. So right now I have 6 whole square units. So let's zoom in on what we have left over. Okay. Well, if I'm looking at this, if I look, and I can use this to kind of show what I want you guys to see, but if you look at these extra square units, if I put this in half diagonally, we can look here and see that 2 halves equal 1 whole. So I can say that this is 1 whole square unit, so that's my 7th, and that this here, this half and this half, is 1 square unit, so that's 8. 8 square units. 8 square units, okay? So sometimes these problems might be a little bit trickier. The main thing that I want you to know coming from this is that our models that we use, they might not always be rectangles. They might not always be squares. They could be circles. They could be triangles. We can find the surface area of any shape, and we'll get more into that later. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We are going to be finding the area using different size square units. So today we're going to go through the metric system and then the standard units of measurement. And there are going to be problems where you're going to have to decide, am I going to use centimeters to measure? Am I going to use inches to measure? Which one of these am I going to use to measure? So I'm actually going to use the notes section today because we're going to come up with some examples together. So for square centimeters or centimeters squared, remember that whenever we have that squared, we know that we're talking about area. So a square that is 1 centimeter on all sides, and then, so each side, if I have a square, is going to be 1 centimeter long. And it's used to measure small areas. So if you think about centimeters squared, remember we always say that if you look at your pinky, right, this line right here, that's about 1 centimeter. So that's a good way to remember what a centimeter looks like. So it's pretty tiny. So what are some things that we might measure with centimeters? Well, I'm going to write centimeters squared up here. I might measure a crayon in centimeters because crayons are usually really small. I might measure a toothpick in centimeters because toothpicks are small. So anytime you use centimeters, it's something that's small, okay? Square meters, so meters squared, that's what it looks like. It has 1 meter on all sides. That's 100 centimeters, okay? So imagine this box right here, a 1 square centimeter, right? Imagine it being 100 times that. Used to measure rooms, houses, etc. So you can see that if it's 100 times this, if that's how big my meter is, you're gonna wanna use it to measure something large, okay? So you would probably use meters squared if you were trying to find the area of a room. So that's right there. If you were trying to find the area of a hallway, a really long hallway, if you wanted to find the area of our classroom, you would probably use use meters. The way I like to remember meters is if you take your arms and you spread them out as wide as you can horizontally, from finger to fingertip, that's about a meter, 100 centimeters. So 100 centimeters equals 1 meter, okay? My next is inches squared. Inches squared. When might we use inches to find the area? It's a small area too, not as small as centimeters. I like to say that inches are usually from where we measured our inch line up to our fingertip on our thumb. Okay, that's about an inch. So what would we use to measure in inches? I might measure a marker, because markers are a little bit longer than crayons. Maybe my hairbrush. Maybe I would use that, okay? But remember, these are things that we take up small, that if we're looking for the area, right? You would want something that's really small, like a kitchen tile that was broken that you want to replace. What would the area of that be, okay? And then square feet, so feet squared. A square foot is 1 foot on all sides, okay? So I like to say that a foot is about from your arm, where your elbow crease is, to your wrist. So that's about 1 foot. We know that 1 foot is equal to 12 inches. And this would be really similar to a meter, although we know that a meter is larger than that. So you might want to also measure your room. You might want to also measure maybe just the kitchen, okay? So if you used meters to measure, you would have less of them because they're larger. If you used feet to measure a room, you would have more of them because they are smaller, okay? So, and if we're looking back here, I'm looking at this, and these are examples of items that are centimeters, but remember, if it's centimeters square and you're finding the area, that's the surface area of something. Okay, so how much something takes up. So if you would be looking for something for a very, very, very small surface area, if it was a centimeter squared, you might be trying to make a little home for an ant out of a mason jar, and you want to know how much dirt you need in the bottom of the mason jar in order to have a little place for your ant to live. That mason jar would be really tiny, so you might want to use centimeters squared to measure that, okay? So let's look. I actually tore this out so that I can use it, that I can look back at this and see my notes, okay? So determine which size unit, square inch or square foot, so either a square inch or a square foot would be best to find the area of a student desk. Well, we know that inches are about from here to here. That's about an inch, okay? We know that a foot, as I told you guys, is from my elbow crease to my wrist, okay? We know that 12 of these equals 1 foot. So what would be better to measure a desk? Well, this really depends on how big the desk is. If we have the desks in our classroom where they're really big tables, you might want to use feet. So if it was our table desks in our classroom in room 11 right now, you might want to use feet squared to see how much area those tables take up because they're bigger, okay? If it was a smaller desk, like the desk that the 5th graders have, where they're more individual, you might still want to use feet squared because we know that a desk is longer from our wrist to an elbow. Our desk is longer than 12 inches. So that would probably be the best decision for both of these. Now, if you had a desk that was, for your, let's say your baby doll had a desk, like a play desk, then you'd probably want to use square inches to measure that because it's a lot smaller, okay? But for the sake of our table desks and smaller desks that we're used to, we would probably use feet squared to see how much area that took up. Circle the best estimate for the area of a math book. Explain your reasoning. Okay, so this is my math book right here. Let's look at, see. You can pretty much see the entire thing. I know that if I look at centimeters and I wanted to see how much space this math book, my entire book was covering, how much area it was covering right now on the ground. Centimeters squared, I know, are really tiny, right? They're about this size, they're used to measure really small areas. I know that meters squared are a lot bigger areas. If I was measuring a room, if I was measuring a hallway, if I was measuring the kitchen, if I was measuring our classroom, I would probably want to use it in meters because it's a larger space. So for this, I'm looking, well, I know that my book is about 1 foot long, which is a lot smaller than a meter. So I'm not going to use meters to measure this book, I'm gonna use centimeters to measure this book, okay? 30 centimeters squared is about the length of my math book. Now I want you to think for a second, can you come up with another way to measure the surface area of your math book that's not centimeters squared? Is there a different unit that you can use besides that? There is. If you said inches squared, I would say that you are also correct, although it wouldn't be 30 inches squared. It would be smaller. Okay, we know that inches are larger than centimeters, so I would have less of them. But inches are about, like I said, from here to here, about this size. And I can definitely use that to measure my book. That would make sense, okay? So for your structure guided practice, you're pretty much doing the same thing. I'll read number 1 to you. Use your knowledge of square centimeters and square meters. I'm gonna underline what's important or box it. Square centimeter, oh, I should do square too, so I know I'm talking about the surface area. In square meters to determine which square unit would be best to find the area of a bulletin board in our classroom. So you want to think of how large the bulletin boards are in our classroom. Okay, think of the one that has our lighthouses on it right now. That's a large bulletin board. So what would be the best way to measure that? What would make most sense? Which would take up less of your time? Okay, so I want you to go ahead and do that and explain yourself. Tell me why. I want to know why you chose that specific unit. And then number 2, circle the best estimate for the area of a chalkboard. Explain your reasoning. 5 centimeters squared or 5 meters squared? You know that centimeters are really tiny, meters are a lot larger. Chalkboards are pretty large. Which one makes most sense? Another way that you need to think about this is, well, how long is 5 centimeters squared? I want you to look at that and picture that. You should be able to picture these all in your head. You know that a centimeter is really tiny, just about this length right here on your pinky thumb. Hold it all up and you should be able to see that. 5 times that? That's about this big, so You really want to think about that and imagine in your head what this would look like. What makes most sense, okay? So you're gonna finish up the rest of your work. Have a great day.